the chapter house at 504 Rugby Road in Charlottesville. And I happened to be the first Rex to live in that house. We were having a chapter house corporation board conference call on a Thursday night, discussing various aspects of what we needed to do to help continually restore the house. Recently, and later learned that after that call, George had his heart attack. So it was with great privilege that I felt I had the opportunity to hear him for the, just the usual George. I'll be there for homecoming. I'm ready. I'm doing that. And we decided afterwards that what could we do locally to honor George? And the decision was made that we are naming 504 Rugby as the George A. Beck House. And as we speak, a plaque is being prepared, and we intend to dedicate it October 17 at homecoming this fall. And so in that honor, and as a prelude to the dedication, please hold up your hands like this. You have a glass of Dewar's in your hand. And we intend to say, George, not 4 years, but for the thousands and thousands of lifetimes you've affected, here's to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, I'd like to invite the president of the Pylander Fire Educational Foundation, Sean Mahoney, Sean Upchurch, rather, not Mahoney, holder of the council key, to the podium.
Thank you, Stan. I am convinced that everybody has a George Beck story, and every one of these George Beck stories is just amazing. George Beck modeled how to lead like a Pylam. The governance boards of Pylander 5 spent the last couple months considering how do we most appropriately honor and remember George Beck for all of the wonderful stories he's created with each of us and all of us. I have the great privilege to represent the Pylander 5 Educational Foundation right now and make two announcements. First, we've suspended the current issue of the Frater to rededicate the fraternal magazine to make a tribute for George Beck. We hope to have that published in the August timeframe. The second announcement is that on Friday, May 29th, yesterday, the Educational Foundation trustees met and decided to launch a capital campaign in honor of George Beck, a $1 million initiative over 5 years with a purpose to cement George's legacy, collaborate with George's family on continuing the great scholarship initiatives that he had created and carry them forward, expand the George Beck Outstanding Chapter of the Year Award, and provide a leadership development platform so other members of our organization can learn how to lead like a Pylam, how to lead like George.
Thank you, Sean Upchurch. Now we're going to invite members of the past professional staff to the podium. The first one would be Gary Sanders, former executive director of Pylam and current member of the Educational Foundation.
So most of you don't know that I'm a big journaler. I write my diary every day and, tell it things, what's happening and, what's going on in my life. And, I took a look and wanted to share some of the key moments that I recorded, dealing with George over the years and special moments. So April 16th, 2005. Dear Diary, because I like feeling like a, teenage girl. Delighted to receive a call from George Beck today. Laura, my admin, let me know it was important to speak with George now. George said hello and asked me if I saw the frauder yet. Of course I had. I helped with it. I put these things together and should know what's going in and out of the office. So then George asked me politely, said, could you turn to the donation page and read off my title? At that point, I looked at it and said, Major George A. Beck, HB. George politely replied and said, demoting me was bad enough, but did you have to put me in the Army? September 22nd, 2006. Arrived in Wexford to the fine hospitality of George and Barry. George told me not to bring him any booze. Wasn't necessary, but I can bring the flowers. We had a little tense and awkward moment where I let him know the flowers were for Barry and not him. Then we proceeded to George's suggestion of let's have a doers and make a fine day of it. There's a couple entries that I can't read, and finally a few things that I was able to make out later in the day. Doers rules. We pranked Stan Glasser. What a sweetheart. I really love cheese. Where am I? Then I have from the September 23rd. Where is the bus that ran over me last night? I can still feel it, but I can't see it. You know that feeling when you get when you see babies laugh, puppies play, and kittens crawl on people? Yeah, that I feel the exact opposite right now. And why is there toothpaste on the inside of my t-shirt? May 15, 2009. Attended a service for Howard Alter. Howard was the George Beck equivalent of Theta Chi. Howard was a mentor to George, a great friend, confidant, and somewhat of a big brother, father figure to George. In the fraternity world, George looked up to no one higher than Howard Alter. George left early that day because it was too much to handle. He was quiet, passive, reserved. You could tell it. He was deeply hurt. I wrote that day. One day, unfortunately, you'll better understand how George feels today. I can listen to George Holden Court over and over. Often listen to him telling, the same story over and again, which I often did. And he taught me many things through GBU, George Beck University, for the uninitiated. That there are many great lessons of life. Be kind to others. Do great things. Let people flourish and grow. That was his key to immortality, how he lives in me and how he lives in everyone here. But then again, I could be wrong. Maybe the key to immortality was really doers.
I have to invite these three individuals up together since they all work directly for George, kind of a murderer's row. Vin Marbury, holder of the council key, Honorable Brother Ezra Krieg, and Honorable Brother Andy Galbert. Can the three of us come up here? I hope you all keep each other in line.
No. I'm the junior member, so I'll go first. I want to thank the family for including us with all this presentation and everything and being here as well. Yesterday, most of the family members said, well, thank you for being here. And it was not whether I'm going to be here or when I would get here. I was definitely, there's no way to stop me from being here. I met George 29 years ago. I went to the other university in Virginia called Virginia Tech, which is the University of Virginia as far as I'm concerned, and didn't know back then that there was a big rivalry between the two. But I was initiated as a junior, and I lived in Connecticut, so I stopped by headquarters and met George, and I started volunteering as an undergrad at headquarters and later became a staff member and so on, and held numerous positions within the fraternity. And I was also lucky enough to meet Sig, George's older brother, who was a founding father at UVA. And to the other brothers at UVA back then, I guess he was the kid brother of Sig is what he was. So I thought that was really interesting that everyone knows George, but he was really the kid brother. This one quick story that really I remember about George was a number of years ago I met and had dinner with Stan Klunder, Ezra, and George and Barry down in Miami. We're down in Florida. And I was going to go stay in a hotel. George is, oh, there's no way you're staying in a hotel. You're staying with us. And I went there and spent that night. And of course, before we went to bed, and I was exhausted. I think I drove 1,000 miles that day. It seemed like. And George said, "No, you got to have a doers with me out on the deck, on the porch there." And I was sitting there watching the planes land in Fort Lauderdale. And a little while later, I went to use the restroom. I'll never forget this. Barry came to me, and she goes, "Vinny, you sitting out there means the world to George, because Lee and George sit out there for hours and tell stories. You have no idea what that means to him." And at that moment, I realized not only was George a friend of mine and a brother, but I was part of the family now. I'll never forget that. Each year after that, at convention, when I saw George, he'd always walk up to me, he'd walk and run almost to me, and he'd give me a big kiss on the cheek. And he goes, "That's from Barry." And I'll never forget that. And I think going forward, I'm going to miss those kisses from George. And he was just a great mentor and friend of mine. Thank you.
I tell y'all, I don't get any respect, so I'm gonna make Stan tell you who I am. No, yeah, come on, man. Okay, well, anyway, my name's Tracy White, and I did work on staff for George in the 80s. Many of y'all will realize from listening to me that you have a very strange accent. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, proud Western North Carolinian. Went to school at Western Carolina University. Go Catamounts. I got to tell you, listening to you talk today, sir, you're one of my private heroes that I know about, okay? Not personally. But my story is different than yours. Race problems, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, it cut both ways. I found myself in public school. This is not something that I've ever spoken about publicly, okay? Never. It's a private matter. The story turns out well. We had race riots at where I lived in Asheville, North Carolina. The governor had to call out the National Guard. There was a curfew at 9 o'clock. The black students walked out of the high school. There was a riot. Everybody knew it was coming, but the teachers. They had kicked out the president of the black students because he had not met the dress code for wearing socks. He went in without socks on purpose. Then it was on. They tore up everything. It was the worst riot ever. New science building totally destroyed. Principal's office totally destroyed. School torched. Cars burnt. Yeah. Asheville, North Carolina, my hometown. You go to Asheville now, we're called the Paris of the South because it is so diverse and there's been so much change that no one believes. I don't let them forget. I said, I'm going to tell you about where we were, you know. Beatings commenced on me because I was the second smallest guy in every class I was in. Now, if you were the smallest guy, you always hit somebody like that. I was always second smallest because I grew late. I was beat a lot by black students that were angry. It was bad. The white students were not together. The black students were. It was horrible, horrible. Finally, in the 7th grade, I had a guy literally try to kill me in class. He was choking me in class around the neck, left red marks around my neck. Finally, I'd had enough. About 2 weeks later, I walked out. Walked up from the school, went in, asked the gentleman for a telephone, called my mother. I said, come get me. I'm not going back. I said, if you send me back, I know where to buy contraband, very nice contraband. I shall go to the principal, throw it in his face every day, and stay expelled. I've had enough. So anyway, the story does turn out good, okay? It was horrible. I'm telling you, it was horrible. So anyway, fast forward, in college, meet all these Yankees. They're all Pi Lambs. There were 7 brothers, no house, nothing, small. I met a redheaded little sister that taught me many lessons, none of which ended up in marriage. And she's still dragging my heart around somewhere. But anyway, then I met the brothers through her, joined the brotherhood, started dating her later. But we finally got a house, okay? We finally got a house. And I was rush chairman. Well, we had 2 black guys that showed up. And I say black because being raised in the 70s, that's the word that I use as a sign of respect and always will. I don't see us as any American hyphenated, I'm sorry. We're all Americans, all of us, period, paragraph. They kept showing up. Anybody that showed up, they got an invitation back. They kept showing up, kept showing up. And I started getting it from all sides. I mean, all sides. Good, bad, otherwise. Heard all the junk. Not now. Not now. I know you heard that probably all the time, didn't you? I remember that. Hearing that from people. It's like, not now, maybe later. I'm like, and I was like, dude, has anybody got a calendar? It's like 1982. I mean, somebody have a calendar on the wall. So, and we had integration at the different private schools that I went to that my parents sent me to get me out of the public school system. Okay? I'd been to all boys boarding school. I'd been to hippie freak school. I'd been to non-denominational school. I'd been to physical school. I mean, so I was steeped in non-sectarian. So anyway, met the brothers. These guys keep showing up, keep inviting them. Didn't know George. Had heard of him, yes. Never talked to him, never met him. So I kind of had a come to the Lord moment. Dressed real nice for the rush thing. Getting ready to wash my face, looking in the mirror. I did not like what I saw. Was I prejudiced? No. Was I racist? Absolutely not. I was not raised that way. My parents never asked questions about anybody. I was always taught that the Jewish people, I'm about as much of a wasp as you'll ever meet, but that the Jewish people were special people because they were God's chosen people, and that every person mattered and every person you were to treat with respect regardless of anything. We had people in and out of my house. I mean, there were 4 kids. We had cats and dogs and fish and people in and out all the time. My parents never asked any questions. I had a friend of mine from Vietnam that came to visit. He was at boarding school and couldn't travel home to Florida, so I was like, come on with me. We leave to go home, and Sonny's like, Tracy, I love your parents. And everybody loved my parents. And I said, why's that? And he said, because they don't ask dumb questions. And then I thought, and I was like, we never ask anybody if they want to talk about it, fine, too. So anyway, so I look in the mirror and look at my pen, and I'm like, I was raised that you always had to do the right thing, regardless of what happened to you, regardless of what might befall you. You had to do what was right because it was right, and that was it. And I was like, look, if I allow these feelings to move forward and allow me to be prejudiced, then those people that beat me have not only beat me, they've defeated me. And I must make the right decision. So I went to see the dean, who was my friend. Go in, ask him, can I speak off the record? Close the door, we talked. I said, from what I understand, no fraternity here in the history of this university has ever been integrated. And he said, that's correct, Tracy. And I said, well, we have 2 gentlemen that are showing up at my house. They want to pledge. If we give them a bid, I know they'll join. And I want to talk to you about it off the record. I said, is this possible? And he said, yes. And he said, Tracy, I've been sitting in this chair for 20 years waiting for you, the guy like you, and the Pi Lambs to show up and sit in front of me. So anyway, what he told me was amazing. He said, I tell you what's going to happen, Tracy. And I'm like, what? And he said, you're going to get blowback from the black fraternities, not the white fraternities. I was like, what? And he said, yeah, because you have a house, they think you're going to put them out of business with Rush. So anyway, long story short, I decided the way to do it was that they had to be judged as an individual and no other considerations done whatsoever. I brought them to the floor. We made the vote, and before the vote, I said, all we're going to discuss is, do you like these guys? Do you want to be a brother or not? That's only 2 requirements. And they passed unanimously. And I said, that's all we're discussing, gentlemen. That's it, period. With every person. They joined in everything. We might as well drop an atomic bomb. But there are a lot of us on the other side of this, and we should have inherited a better world. George was about making a better world and building bridges between different people. I went to work for him on staff. He's amazing. Laser beam. He could tell you about a chapter like, you didn't do this, this, this. and he'd say, handle it. He gave you confidence, and I wish I could say like he pushed you, but he didn't push it. He just said, you just go do it, because I know you can do it. It's like this. I mean, and definitely working for him. I met Eddie Goldman later. He was my mentor, and then through Eddie became friends with George when I was the Rex. But anyway, there are a lot of people here with a lot of stories. Again, I've never shared this publicly. I know I've gone on, but it's not easy to talk about. But hey, whatever befalls you, whatever you hurt with, don't pass it on, man. Make it their problem. And George taught me an awful lot, so God bless him. One last thing. I remember when George was dating Barry, and all the old brothers, were talking, and they were like, "Oh man, George has this lady he's dating." It's like, man, this day. He said, "Oh, she's wonderful, man, sweet, wonderful lady, intelligent." It's like, it's like the guy's like a slide devil. I'm telling the brothers, like, man, wait till you meet her. And then we met Barry, and it was like, oh man, George, how'd you figure that one out? So thank you for sharing him with us. I mean, and look at how far everybody's traveling, everything for this one man. He truly was an amazing man. Thank you very much.
So I tell my staff that I'm flying to Pittsburgh, and they say, why would anyone fly to Pittsburgh? And I said, I'm going to honor George Beck. And they said, who is George Beck? And I started thinking about that. Who is George Beck? George Beck was a friend, or is a friend, a mentor. I spent late nights with him and Eddie Goldman. He was certainly a snappy dresser, a war hero, my boss, a captain, proud pie lamb. He attended Don Larson's Perfect Game, told me about it hundreds of times. Bought me lunch at the Red Barn. He had an easy laugh. I never forgave him for setting me up with an apartment with Danny Meister. He was the Commodore, salesman, my confidant, founder of the GBU chapter of Pi Lambda Phi. He was truly a second father to me. He was my drinking buddy. He was tough as nails. He told great stories about Stan Glasser. He was too often too kind-hearted. He had that great big smile. Sometimes when we met, at some point he'd say, Arthur Kimmerfield who? That's a real inside joke. He was a proud father. He was a very proud and devoted husband. He made me to drive to New York one time to meet with George Bruckman. He could tell a story like nobody else. He had some religious affiliation with some cult that was built around Andy Goldberg. Andy. He was a leader. He was a lot of things. I do have to tell you one quick story, one that maybe I haven't shared with you. George came down to Florida. I did and continue to do a lot of media work in Florida. So it was during a time there was a lot of controversy about whether fraternities should exist and so on. I had a good friend who ran a talk show on a local Miami station. And so we were talking, and I said, this guy, George Beck, this good friend of mine, he's Mr. Fraternity. Do you want to have him as a guest on your show? And she said, yeah, that would be really cool. And I talked to George, and George was a little bit reluctant, but I finally convinced him that he would go on this radio show. It was this hour show in Miami. And he had said that he would talk about anything except for what was going on. There was some stuff going at the University of Florida, and he would talk about anything but University of Florida chapter. And of course, this good friend of mine who was the radio host said, first question out of the box, so tell me about your Florida Delta chapter at the University of Florida. And that's how this interview went. And they duked it out for an hour, and George really fought hard. But the best part of this story is it was a call-in show. And about 25 minutes into the show, a phone call comes in, and this guy is on the phone, and he goes, oh my God, oh my God. And the woman is asking, why are you calling? And so, and he goes, George Beck really exists. and that's how he starts the conversation. And she says, what do you mean by that? And he goes, I've been learning I'm a pledge of Pi Lambda Phi at some school. I don't know what school it was. And one of the people I have to learn about is George Beck, and I just didn't believe that he really exists. And I'm actually talking to him on the phone. He said, I had to pull over to the side of the road to make this phone call. So I always thought that was really, really funny that George Beck really exists. Well, George Beck really does exist. And when I said, who is George Beck, I say it because the relationship that we shared will be part of me for the rest of my life. And I can honestly say I know that George loved me, and I still love George.
I went to work for the fraternity about a month before George started. I was a field secretary. It was the title then. We had a lot of titles, not a lot of money, but we had a lot of titles. When you got a raise, it was really, you became associate something or executive field secretary. They figured that was good enough for that year anyway. George and I both learned hand in hand about our fraternity and its operation. This was 1966, but our office was modeled after an office of 1935. You see the Progressive Soup advertisements on television with the can and the string. That was our inter-office communication system. Dictation machine, that was one of those round cylinder wax records that you would scrape off after the letter was transcribed. And we had a copy machine. It wasn't a Xerox, it was pre-Xerox. Fred Flintstone made it, I think. And it was called a wet process machine, where the paper ran through and you peeled the thing off and it took a bath, and then you hung it up like laundry around the office so that the copies could dry. And about 3 days later, they were so yellow that you couldn't read the damn things anyway. Slowly we progressed under George's leadership and got up to another dictation machine, I remember, which was a flat tape that rolled around the thing, and you had to throw them away after every couple of uses because they were worthless. Anyhow, we had a good time exploring the inner workings of the fraternity. We had a woman who was our office director, Martha Fuldauer, whose name is on that plaque too, one of two women on that plaque, incidentally. I'm going to go over there and go through some of those names because I think it's worthwhile. We had a woman, she'd been working there since, 1940. She knew more Pi Lambs than anyone alive. She saved rubber bands. Martha didn't throw anything out because you never know when you might need it. And there was a ball of rubber bands there that two people had to roll around the office. And every time, we would try to peel one off, 7 of them would pop, And she straightened every paper clip ever known that came in bent. She would straighten those paper clips out. God bless her. I never knew she had a desk in her office until about 3 years after I was there. The thing was piled so high, I didn't know what it was. It was a challenge, and it was fun. The fun was working with guys like the University of Virginia guys.
that made up for the lack of salary, the lack of prestige, the fact that we were a small fraternity, and we were always looking down the throats of the other guys in New York who had the bucks and had the fancy this and the fancy that, and we were using the soup can with the string. I spent a lot of nights in Westport because we would travel through New England, and it was handy for us to get a start from Connecticut rather than New York. And I never forget the hospitalities of the Becks. Tony and Diana were little kids, you know. Diana was quiet, I remember, and well, that's what I remember.